The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Mira Ashwell had always thought an undignified day for catastrophe. She was on her knees in the estate library when she heard it read aloud, not by the man who received it, but by her elder sister Cecily, who had picked it from the silver tray with the ease of someone long accustomed to handling what belonged to others. The Duke of Carwell presents his compliments to Sir Aldous Ashwell and requests the hand of one of his daughters in the matter of the Thornfield debt. Mira did not move. She remained where she was among the lower shelves, cataloging the third-quarter inventory of Sir Aldous's legal correspondence, her back to the room and her pencil still. She had learned this posture very young. The posture of furniture, of someone a room forgets, is present. She had learned it the way a soldier learns to be still in tall grass, not from cowardice, but because stillness gathers information that movement only scatters. She would remember this moment longest, afterward, not for what Cecily said next, nor for what her father answered, but for the quality of the silence that preceded them, the silence of two people working out, rapidly, which of their instruments they were prepared to sacrifice. The clever one, obviously, Cecily said, would be wasted on a duke. She makes herself too useful here. Carwell won't want a wife who reads the steward's accounts better than the steward does. Sir Aldous made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite anything else. Send him the other, Cecily said pleasantly. Send him Mira. Tell him she cannot read past a simple sentence. He will not trouble to verify it. Men of that rank never do. The pencil did not tremble in Mira's hand. This was not because the words did not reach her. They reached her precisely. It was because she had been keeping her own accounts since she was 12 years old, and she understood already, in the unhurried way of the genuinely observant, that Cecily had just handed her a piece of information she would one day want to have on paper. She wrote nothing in the margin of the inventory. She simply finished her count, replaced the ledger, and went to dinner. That dinner was where she met Mr. Aldwych Tross, her father's new land steward, a compact, mild-faced man who smiled warmly at Cecily and said almost nothing to Mira, which she noted as the first small indicator of a pattern. The Thornfield debt she had gathered from 3 years of reading the correspondence that everyone left for her to file was a matter of £12,000. 3 years of poor harvests, and a signed instrument of encumbrance on the western barley fields, whose terms her father apparently could not clearly recall. She could recall them. She had copied them out herself. The encumbrance was due in full in 29 days, on the 1st of October. That was the clock. It had been running for some time, and no one had told her it was running except the documents themselves. The Duke of Carwell arrived on Thursday. He was not what she expected, which was, in itself, interesting. She had expected a man who corresponded about debts to have the sleek predictability of a creditor. Rafferty Morn arrived instead the way weather arrives, ahead of itself, already present before anyone had quite arranged to receive it. He was taller than the doorway was comfortable with, which he solved by moving through it slowly. He had the hands of someone who used them, ink-stained at the second knuckle, a callus at the right thumb's base, and a manner so still in its address that every other person in the entry hall seemed, by contrast, to be constantly milling about for no reason. He met Sir Aldous. He met Cecily, who performed a curtsy of exquisite calibration, her golden hair arranged to catch the afternoon window light, her voice pitched to its most pleasing register. Then he met Mira. She had come in last, as was her habit, carrying a stack of correspondence she had been sorting in the small back room. She was not arranged. She had an ink stain on the heel of her left hand that she had not quite managed to eliminate, and her hair was braided rather than dressed, and she knew she looked, like the house rather than its inhabitants, competent, useful, and not quite a guest anywhere. Rafferty Morn looked at her for 4 seconds. Then he looked at the correspondence in her hands. Then he looked at her face again, with the quality of attention she associated with people who are genuinely reading rather than merely looking. She gave him nothing to read. She had practiced this for 23 years. Miss Ashwell, her father said, placing the faintest possible weight of emphasis on the lack of a first name, indicating this Ashwell was the lesser instance. My younger daughter, Miss Ashwell, the Duke repeated, and that was all he said. That evening, her father called her to his study and explained the arrangement with the benevolent authority of a man delivering good fortune. She would marry the Duke of Carwell. The Duke required a wife who was biddable and uninterfering. Her sister, Sir Aldous said carefully, was too spirited for the role, too independent-minded. Too much herself, qualities valuable in an Ashwell daughter and dangerous in a ducal household. Mira, who had been described as too much of herself precisely never in her life, kept her face entirely still. I understand, she said. Carwell has agreed the debt will be settled as part of the contract. We will all benefit from this arrangement. I am sure we will, Mira said. May I see the contract? Her father blinked. There is no need for you to. It is a legal instrument, Mira. Tross is handling it. Of course, she said. Forgive me. She went to bed and lay awake for an hour, thinking about Mr. Tross and the contract he was handling, and the £12,000 whose terms she had once copied by hand. She was not yet afraid. There was a thing she could not yet lay before anyone, a thing she would need to examine more carefully before she showed it to the light. But she knew it was there, the way she always knew. The way a woman who reads documents learns to feel the difference between a clean instrument and one that has been revised. The engagement was announced at a small supper 2 days later. The Duke of Carwell sat at the table's head and said very little, which Mira was coming to understand was his characteristic contribution to social occasions. He watched Cecily perform, and Cecily's performance was considerable, a masterwork of the form, all artless grace and charming self-deprecation, with the expression of a man observing a play in a language he has not quite followed. He watched Mira pour tea. She had a method. She read the cup before she poured it, adjusting for the small preferences she had observed over the course of a single meal, the sister of the house friend who took hers half-filled, the elderly solicitor who wanted the pot held so the last draw didn't cloud his cup. She did it without commentary or display. When she reached the Duke's cup, she paused. How do you take it? It was the first direct question she had addressed to him. He looked at her, that 4-second quality of attention again, as if he were not just hearing the words, but reading what lived behind them. Black, he said. You noticed the solicitors. He mentioned it at dinner at the Harrogate sessions 2 years ago, she said. I was filing papers at the sideboard and happened to hear. You have a good memory for what you happened to hear, said the Duke. I find it useful, said Mira. A pause. I imagine you do, he said. This was not, on its face, a remarkable exchange. Cecily, Mira noted, was watching them from across the table with the particular stillness of someone who has just heard something they were not intended to hear and is deciding whether it signifies. Mr. Tross was watching too, with a pleasant, untroubled expression that did not reach his eyes. The contract was brought to Mira on the morning of the following Monday, 5 pages on cream vellum delivered by Tross himself, who stood in the sitting-room doorway with a pen already in hand and a smile of thoughtful accommodation. His Grace suggests you set your mark here, and here, Tross said, indicating 2 lines at the bottom of the 4th and 5th pages. He understands you may find the instrument somewhat complex in its phrasing, and wishes you to know that everything has been arranged with your comfort and security foremost in mind. Mira took the contract. She turned to page 1. "I will read it first," she said. Tross's smile did not change. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I will wait." She read it. All 5 pages. She read it the way she read every document that had come through Sir Aldous' library for the past 3 years, slowly at the surface, rapidly underneath, running the numbers in her head before she reached the summary clause. When she reached page 3, paragraph 7, her hand was very still. When she reached page 4, she turned back to page 1 and read it again. Tross was still smiling when she looked up. "This instrument does not settle the Thornfield encumbrance," she said. "It assigns the encumbrance to a separate instrument of indebtedness in my name, accruing from the date of the marriage." A silence. "The phrasing is somewhat technical," Tross said pleasantly. What it means in effect is that, upon my marriage to the Duke, the £12,000 debt becomes mine individually, and the Western barley fields remain encumbered as collateral against my personal credit rather than my father's. The Duke's name does not appear in the settlement clause at all. He does not retire the debt. He acquires a wife who carries it. Tross's pleasantness did not waver. It was, she thought, admirable in its way. The pleasantness of a man who has spent considerable time perfecting pleasantness as an instrument of pressure. "I would encourage you to discuss this with your father," he said. "He has reviewed the contract and is satisfied with its terms. I am sure he has reviewed the parts you placed before him," Mira said. This was the moment she understood she had made an enemy of Mr. Tross, not because of anything he said, but because of what happened to his hands. They made a very small adjustment, fingers closing in toward the palm. That was not a gesture of relaxation. She filed it. She did not sign. She said she would require another day and excused herself. She spent that afternoon in the library, pulling every piece of correspondence between Tross and the family's solicitors over the past 18 months. She was very thorough. She had always been thorough. What she was looking for, what she suspected, would not be obvious if Tross was careful, and Tross was careful. But the documents that passed through a careful man's hands for long enough begin to accumulate the shape of him. By evening, she had 3 letters that did not bear exactly the handwriting she would have expected on instruments of that formality, though they bore the right seals. And she had 1 letter, written in a hand she recognized as her father's in its formation, but not its pressure, not its angle, not the particular way Sir Aldous' hand bore down on an that authorized a renegotiation of the Thornfield encumbrance terms in a manner that served Tross's commission considerably and her father's interests considerably less. She put these letters very carefully in the inside pocket of her gray wool dress. Then she went to find the Duke. She found him in the stable yard rather than the house, which she had not expected, or rather, she had expected it about as much as she expected anything she found herself revising. He was examining one of the estate's working horses with the attention of someone who knew what he was looking at, his coat off, despite the September chill. And when he saw her coming across the yard with her gray dress and her careful expression, he straightened in a way that was not quite standing to attention and not quite anything else. "Miss Ashwell," he said. "Your Grace." She stopped at the appropriate distance. "I have read your contract." Something moved in his face and stilled again, the way a current moves under river ice, gone before you could prove you saw it. "Tross tells me you found it complex." "Tross tells you a number of things," she said. "I would like to show you 3 of them." She produced the letters. She held them in the level autumn light. There was no direct sun, but the sky was bright and even, good light for reading, and she explained what they were and what they demonstrated with the same composure she brought to everything, which was not the composure of someone who was not afraid. It was the composure of someone who was afraid, and has decided that fear is not, at present, the most useful thing she has to offer. When she finished, the Duke was very still. "You found these in the estate library," he said. "They were filed there." "I file a great deal in the estate library. It is how I know that the original terms of the Thornfield encumbrance, signed in your name and my father's, did not include a personal transfer clause, and it is how I know that the authorization to revise those terms appears to bear my father's signature in a hand that is not my father's hand. The pressure is wrong. He leans on his This one does not." The Duke took the letters. He held each one to the light for a long moment, the same unhurried, 4-second quality of attention he turned on things that required it. And then he looked at her. "Why are you bringing this to me?" he said, "rather than to your father?" "Because my father employed Tross," Mira said, "and because I do not think you knew what the contract said. And because the debt is due in 29 days, 19 now, and I would prefer to address the actual problem rather than have an argument about whether I should have been reading documents in the first place." He did not speak for a moment. "You would prefer," he repeated, very quietly. "I would prefer," she said steadily. Yes, the Duke's first joke, of the true variety that reached the eyes, came then, dry and small and entirely unexpected, delivered to the middle distance rather than at her. "Your sister, I believe, was described to me as the more manageable of the two." "My sister has many excellent qualities," Mira said. "I begin to see that hers were not the qualities enumerated to me." He folded the letters once and handed them back, to her hand, not to the air between them. "May I ask what you would propose?" she told him. He listened with his whole attention, which she was learning was his way of showing respect, not agreement, not warmth yet, but the courtesy of genuine attention paid to someone whose mind he was revising his estimate of, one clause at a time. What she proposed was not simple. It required the original encumbrance instrument, a witness who was neither Tross nor her father's household, and a question put to the right person in the right room with the right evidence already laid on the table. She had thought it through. She had been thinking it through since Monday morning when she read page 3, paragraph 7. "You have been planning this for 4 days, the Duke said. "I have been planning this for 4 days, she agreed. "I wanted to be certain I was right before I showed you what I had." "And are you certain?" She looked at him directly, which she had been allowing herself to do slightly more of over the course of this conversation. "I am certain of the documents," she said. "I am less certain of other things." He did not ask what other things. He simply nodded once, which she thought might be his equivalent of a great many words, and said, "Then we have 19 days. Tell me what you need." She told him. The days that followed had the quality of a drawn bow, tension held at a precise and constant angle, productive rather than explosive, directed at a specific point. The Duke was, she discovered, a meticulous correspondent. He wrote to his own solicitor in London, to his estate trustee, and to a Mr. Parwell, a name she recognized from the original Thornfield instrument as the independent clerk of record who had witnessed its signing. He wrote these letters himself, in his own hand, and he showed them to her before he sent them. She did not quite know what to do with being shown things. She was more accustomed to finding them. Tross, in the meantime, continued his pleasantness. He was particularly pleasant to Mira at dinner, asking after her reading and her needlework with the warm condescension of someone who has decided a threat has been neutralized. She thanked him and said she found needlework soothing, which was not true, but was the right answer. Cecily watched these exchanges with a quality of attention Mira recognized as calculation, though she could not yet determine what Cecily was calculating toward. She found out on the 16th day, at 9 in the morning, in the east sitting room. Cecily closed the door. "Whatever you have told Carwell," her sister said, in her pleasantest voice, and Cecily's pleasantness was genuine where Tross's was fabricated, which made it in some ways more formidable. "I would encourage you to consider whether you have thought through all of the consequences." "I think about consequences," Mira said, "quite a lot. Tross has been with this family for 3 years. Father trusts him completely. If you are suggesting that his handling of the Thornfield matter has been anything other than, I am not suggesting," Mira said. "I have the original instrument and 3 letters of revision. The question is what the letters show, and whether the signature on the 3rd can be demonstrated to have been made by the person who purportedly signed it. Those are evidentiary questions, not suggestions." Cecily's hands made a small adjustment, fingers closing in, the same gesture Tross had made. The same gesture. Mira noted it. "You could simply sign the contract," Cecily said. "The arrangement is good for all of us. Tross has managed everything very carefully." "I am sure he has," Mira said. "That is rather the problem." She looked at her sister, whom she had known for 23 years, whose tricks and kindnesses and sharpnesses she had catalogued over those years with the same thoroughness she brought to all documents. "You knew what the contract said." Cecily met her gaze for 4 seconds. Then she turned and left the room. Mira stayed where she was until the sound of her sister's footsteps faded down the hall. Then she went to the writing desk in the corner, where she had, over the past week, been compiling something, a close, careful account of the Thornfield documents, their revision history, the difference in the signature pressure, and the commission schedule implicit in the new terms, which Tross stood to collect if the revised encumbrance was enacted. She read it through once. She made 2 small corrections. She added a date at the top. Then she went to find the housekeeper, Mrs. Pell, who had been with the Ashwell family for 26 years and had a manner of absolute certainty about what she had seen and when she had seen it that Mira had always found extremely useful. "The letter from the London solicitor," Mira said, "the one that arrived in August of last year with the Thornfield revisions enclosed. You received it." "I did," said Mrs. Pell, in the direct way of someone who is not uncertain about things they saw with their own eyes. "Who signed for it?" Mrs. Pell looked at her steadily. "Mr. Tross. Sir Aldous was in Harrogate." The letter sat in Mr. Tross's care for 4 days before Sir Aldous saw it. "I remember, because Sir Aldous was put out, that it had been opened already when he received it. He assumed the postboy had been clumsy with the seal." "Would you be willing to say so?" Mira said, "before witnesses, if it came to that?" "I would be willing to say so before the king himself," said Mrs. Pell, "if it came to that." Mira thanked her and went to write to the Duke. The reckoning came on the 23rd day, 6 days before the Thornfield debt was due. It came in the form of a meeting in the drawing room of the Ashwell estate, not a courtroom, not a solicitor's office, but a drawing room, which was nonetheless arranged with the deliberate clarity of a tribunal. The Duke had arrived at 10. His solicitor, a slight, precise man named Carver, had arrived at past. Mr. Parwell, the original clerk of record, had come from 3 counties distant at the Duke's request, and sat now near the window with a leather satchel across his knee. Mrs. Pell stood by the door. Sir Aldous sat in his chair by the fire, looking, for the first time in Mira's memory, genuinely uncertain. Tross stood near the mantelpiece and was pleasant. Cecily was not present. Mira had asked the Duke that she not be, and the Duke had not asked why. Mira had the letters in her inside pocket. She had the compiled account in her hand. She had spent the previous evening reading both through twice more, not because she doubted them, but because she was the kind of woman who preferred to arrive at a reckoning with her material perfectly mastered. The Duke opened the meeting without preamble, which she was coming to understand was characteristic of him. He laid the question out in plain terms, the Thornfield encumbrance, its original terms, and the revision instruments whose authorization was in question. He said he was not there to accuse anyone of anything, but to establish what the documents showed, and then to act accordingly. Tross said, pleasantly, that he was glad to help clarify any confusion, and that the revision had been authorized by Sir Aldous in writing, which was why the instrument bore Sir Aldous' signature. It does, Mira said. It was the first time she had spoken. The room's attention came to her the way a compass needle comes to north, and she did not look away from Tross. May I ask when Sir Aldous signed it? Tross smiled. In the matter of the August revisions, I presented the instrument to Sir Aldous on the 14th, after he returned from Harrogate. The letter arrived on the 11th, Mira said. Mrs. Pell received it and logged it in the household correspondence book. She can confirm that. She can also confirm that the letter was already opened when it reached Sir Aldous 4 days later, which he noted at the time. She turned to Parwell. Mr. Parwell, you witnessed the original Thornfield instrument. Parwell was a careful man who had traveled 3 counties because a duke had asked him to, and who would, she had judged correctly, answer direct questions directly. I did, he said. The original instrument authorized no personal transfer clause, she said. There was no provision for the debt to be assigned to any individual's credit separate from the estate. That is correct, Parwell said. The encumbrance was against the Ashwell estate in its entirety. She took the letters from her pocket. She laid them on the table. Then she took from the leather case she had carried into the room the compiled account, and on top of it she placed a document that was not the compiled account but the original, the August revision instrument itself, with its questioned signature. Mr. Parwell, she said, would you be willing to look at this? He crossed to the table. He looked at the signature for a long moment. I have seen Sir Aldous Ashwell sign his name to documents on 5 occasions, he said. 3 of those occasions were in this room. He did not look up from the paper. This is not his hand. The silence that followed was the particular quality of silence that follows the production of an object that cannot be argued with. Sir Aldous stood up. He did not speak for a moment. He was looking at Tross with the expression of a man who has been reassessing, very rapidly, every decision of the past 18 months. Then he sat down again. Tross's pleasantness did not shatter. This was the thing about a certain kind of careful man. The pleasantness persists past the point where it can possibly be genuine, past the point where it is anything but reflex. Then he said, very quietly, I can explain. Yes, said the Duke, you can. There was something in how he said it, the flatness, the stillness, that was not cruelty. It was the tone of a man who has decided that what is in the room must be in the room, and who will hold that space without enjoying it, Tross explained. It took some time. The explanation was, in its way, almost honest, the arithmetic of a man who had spent 3 years watching a family's money flow the wrong direction and had decided to redirect a small portion of the current his own way, and then a slightly larger portion, and had told himself each time that he was merely securing what the family's own disorganization would otherwise lose. He had forged the authorization. He had staged the revision. He had expected a wife who could not read past a simple sentence to sign a contract she would not understand, and the encumbrance to pass quietly into an instrument he could manage. When he finished, the Duke looked at Mira. She read his face, the grave, still face she had been learning to read for 23 days now, the face that carried feeling the way deep water carries current, not on the surface. He was asking her a question without asking it. She turned to Tross. You will resign your position as of today, she said. My father will write you a reference that covers your genuine competencies, which are considerable. The commission you improperly accrued will be returned and applied to the Thornfield debt. You will leave this county. I will not report this to any magistrate, and I will not speak of it beyond this room. In return, you will give us in your own hand a full account of every instrument you have altered, so that they can be corrected. She paused. My father needs his steward, Mr. Tross. This family does not benefit from a public scandal. Neither do you. Tross looked at her for a long moment. You are being kind, he said, and something happened in his face that she had not expected. Something that was not a gesture of pleasantness and not a strategy. Something that was simply a man who had been found out, hearing that he will not be destroyed by it. I did not expect you to be kind. I am being practical, Mira said. There is a difference, though I will allow that in this case, they arrive at the same place. Carver produced a fresh sheet of paper. Tross sat down and began to write. It took half an hour. No one left the room. Mrs. Pell made tea, which she delivered without commentary and which everyone accepted. When Tross finished and signed his account, he stood and gave a short, correct bow to Mira first, and then to the Duke, and then to the room, and left. Mira did not watch him go. She was watching her father, who was looking at his hands in the manner of a man working out something complicated and overdue. I told Carwell you could not read, Sir Aldous said, to his hands. I know, said Mira. I thought. He stopped. I told myself it was the better arrangement. For you, a duke. Security. You told yourself several things, she said, not unkindly. I expect most of them were even true. Her father looked up at her then, and she saw in his face something she had not seen there in a very long time, perhaps not since her mother's death, which had happened when Mira was 8 and had left Sir Aldous with one daughter who reminded him of his loss and one who did not, and who had therefore been easier to look at. I am sorry, he said. It was a small word for a large thing. She took it at its weight. We have 18 days to correct the Thornfield instruments, she said. Shall we begin? What she did not say to her father, and what she did not allow herself to examine until much later, was the thing that had been building somewhere behind her practical accounting all along. The question of why the Duke had come here, 3 counties from his own estate, on the basis of a letter about a debt. The question of why he had watched her pour tea, the question of why he had shown her his letters before he sent them, and listened to her plan with his whole attention, and handed back the evidence to her hand. The drawing room had emptied by the time she found herself alone in it. Carver had gone with the documents. Parwell had gone with his satchel. Mrs. Pell had gone with the tea service. Her father had gone to the library to begin the process of sorting out what else might need correcting. The fire was low, and the light in the room was the pale gold of a September afternoon going toward evening. The Duke was still there. He was standing at the window with his back to her, the line of his shoulders, the ink-stained right hand resting at his side, and when she said nothing, he said, My wife died 4 years ago. She had known this from the letters. She waited. She died because I decided alone that the matter of her illness was one I could manage. I determined what treatment was required, what physicians to trust, what information she needed to have. I was thorough. The word was dry, self-indicting. She had more to offer than I allowed her to. Mira looked at the back of his head, at the particular stillness of a man delivering a blow to himself rather than to anyone else. That is the wound, he said. I thought you should know what it is. She thought about what to say for a moment, and then she said the true thing I would have wanted to know. He turned. And there was his face, which she had been learning to read for 23 days, The face that was not cold, she understood now, but careful. The face of a man who had unilaterally decided what others could bear and had paid the only price that ever really teaches anything. "There is no debt now," he said. "Tross's returned commission will cover the balance." "You are not," he paused. "You owe me nothing. You owe your father nothing. You are at liberty to go where you like." I wanted that to be clear. "It is clear," she said. "Good." A long moment. "Then I will tell you something else," he said, "which is separate from the debt, and which I would ask you to receive as entirely separate from it." He looked at her with the 4-second quality of attention that she realized, been counting on, without knowing she was counting on it. "I would like to know you better. Over a length of time. Without a contract, and without an encumbrance, and without a deadline pressing on every hour." He paused again. "I find that I have been looking forward to your letters. I find that when I am in a room where you are also present, I am aware of the room in a different way. I do not know what to do with this information, except to give it to you plainly and let you do as you like with it." She had thought, more than once over the past 23 days, about what she would say when this moment came. If it came, rehearsing it with the same thoroughness she brought to documents, lining up arguments and outcomes. In the moment, she found she had no use for any of them. "Plainly," she said, "is the only way I receive things." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was closer than she had seen. "You would have to manage the Carwell library," he said. "It has been neglected badly. That is not a reason to marry someone." "No, but it is a reason to visit, to begin with." She looked at him for a moment, this grave, ink-stained, carefully honest man who had handed back evidence to her hand and asked for her plan, and listened to it with his whole attention. "Then I will visit," she said. "And we will see what the library requires." She visited in October, when the leaves were coming down and the Thornfield debt was settled, and Mr. Parwell had certified the corrected instruments, and Tross had departed the county quietly for a stewardship in the north, where his genuine competencies would presumably serve someone more honestly. Cecily had come to find her the evening before Mira left and had stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a long moment without speaking, and Mira had looked up from her packing and said, "I know," which covered most of what Cecily might have said, and Cecily had nodded once and gone to bed. The Carwell Library was, as promised, badly neglected. She spent 2 weeks there the first visit, and 3 weeks the second, and by November she could see that a proper accounting of the catalog would require considerably more time than visits permitted. She stayed. The Duke found his first genuine laugh, the one that reached his eyes completely, the one she would remember as a plot event, over a letter of his late steward's that had been misfiled in the poetry section, which she discovered in December and brought to him with a completely straight face, and which he read, and over which he laughed. And the sound of it moved through the library the way good light moves, filling corners she hadn't known were dim. "You are laughing," she observed. "I am aware," he said, still doing it. They married in January, quietly, in the small church adjacent to the Carwell estate, with Parwell and Mrs. Pell as witnesses and one of the young footmen weeping openly in the back pew, for reasons that were never quite established but that involved, several of the household suspected, a long and devoted admiration of the kind that a sensible person does not discourage in the young. Sir Aldous came and was moved and made a short speech at the breakfast that was better than anything he had managed in the library in September. He had hired a new steward, a woman recommended by Parwell, who had kept accounts for a neighboring estate for 15 years with impeccable results, and whose appointment had caused considerable comment in the county. which Sir Aldous had borne with the steady dignity of a man who has revised his positions and intends to hold the revised ones. Cecily was not at the wedding. She had taken up a position as companion to an elderly widowed countess in Bath, an arrangement that suited her considerable gifts for society and management, and she wrote Mira a letter in late January that said, among other things, "You were always the one who saw things clearly. I told myself I was protecting the family. I know what I was protecting." That was all she said about it, and it was enough. The henchman, Tross's connection at the London solicitor's office, who had prepared the forged revision, a young clerk named Simmet, who had been promised a finder's fee he had not yet received, had presented himself to Carver in late October when it became clear that the fee was not coming and the exposure was, and had given a complete account in exchange for lenient treatment. He was discharged from his position and removed from the register and went to work, last anyone heard, in his family's printing establishment in Bristol. The redeemable witness. Everyone got a future that fit their actual size. The Thornfield fields came back into production the following spring, the barley yield up by a third with better drainage and a competent hand directing the planting. Mira noted this in the estate accounts, which she kept with the precision of someone who had been keeping accounts since she was 12 and now had the tools to do it properly. The Duke reviewed them every fortnight and asked good questions, and did not once suggest that the matter was perhaps too technical for her to manage. She had been married almost a year the morning she was in the Carwell Library, cataloging the final section of uncatalogued correspondence, when she heard wheels on gravel and looked up to find that the sound was not a visitor, but a pair of swallows settling noisily on the windowsill and arguing about it. She laughed, alone in the library, at a pair of birds, and heard footsteps, and Rafferty came in with 2 cups of tea and set one beside her hand without comment, and looked at the birds and looked at her. "They have been there every morning," she said. "I have been waiting to see how long it would take you to notice." "I noticed," he said, "the first morning." She looked at him. He looked at her. The swallows continued their argument. "Marry me because you wish it," he had said, in November, in this same room, standing at this same window, when the leaves were gone and the light was low, and she had just found the misfiled steward's letter. "It is the only reason I will take." "I wish it," she had said. She had wished it then. She wished it now, in January's 2nd year, with the tea warm beside her hand, and the birds on the sill, and the accounts balanced, and the library, at last, after considerable effort, properly catalogued. "It is the only reason worth taking." She had said this to him in December, handing back his own November words across a library table. He had looked at her for 4 seconds. Then he had nodded once, which was Rafferty Morn for a great many things she had learned to translate without needing him to say them. She returned to the correspondence, and he sat in the chair across the table and read, and the birds eventually settled their dispute and were quiet, and the fire was warm, and the year was new. If this story warmed you, if you have ever been the one the room forgot was present, the one they handed the difficult work and the smaller title and the polite diminishment, and you know what it costs to stay still and keep your accounts and wait for the moment the light falls right, then you know what this hearth holds for you. There is always a chair here, and the kettle is always on, and the fire does not go out between stories. I would love to know which moment stayed with you longest. The contract read aloud in the stable yard light, or the first time she handed back his words, or something quieter. Tell me in the comments, and stay as long as you like. If you want to keep this chair by the fire, there is a place here for you whenever you come back. Sleep well, and be gentle with the ones who kept your lamp lit when you were still learning you deserved one.